Sir Charles Napier is one of two army officers commemorated in Trafalgar Square. The other is Sir Henry Havelock. In 2000, the then Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, famously remarked that he hadn't a clue who either were. Ken's historical analysis has often generated controversy, but on this occasion at least, he was probably giving the same answer that most Londoners would have given if asked who either the two officers were. That was not always the case, however. In Victorian society, both men were very famous indeed. Soldiers who had paid their own travel expenses crammed into Napier's funeral service. Havelock became a popular Christian name in Victorian Britain, and public subscriptions in the 1850s paid for both statues. In another video, we saw how Admiral Lord Nelson, the man most associated with Trafalgar Square, was far from an unblemished hero. The same could easily be said for Napier. He was brave, ambitious, and something of a free thinker. In the Anglo-American War of 1812, he proposed marching on Washington and freeing black slaves en route. Back in Britain, he was sympathetic to the demands of the Chartists and was devoted to his two daughters. At a time when conditions in the army were very harsh, he opposed flogging, provided married quarters for his soldiers, and was the first commander to mention private soldiers in dispatches. At the same time, Napier was dishonest, touchy, chippy, and paranoid. He never tired of complaining about his enemies, men who did not recognise his talents or who denied him the rewards which he felt he deserved. He was bad-tempered and irascible. At one point he even criticised some of his fellow officers in India as sons of bitches. Nowhere are the contradictions in his character more visible than in his attitude towards imperialism. Napier thought deeply about the rights and wrongs of empire. He was sympathetic to Irish complaints about British rule, and, at a time when Roman Catholics were still the subject of several disabilities, he allowed Catholic soldiers to have their own church parades. He supported the Greek insurrection against Turkish imperial rule. He believed that oppressive and incompetent rulers were to blame for the desperate state of both Ireland and Greece. He condemned Britain's usual method of colonisation as simply the robbery, oppression, murder and extermination of natives. He also described Britain's conquest of India as a crime that had been motivated solely by money. That said, when in 1841 he was offered the command of the British Bombay Army, Napier accepted gladly. Here was a chance to command his own army and to make a fortune to provide for him and his daughters. 1 year after his arrival in India, he provoked a war with the rulers of the province of Sindh in what is now Pakistan. Victory in the war meant that Napier received tens of thousands of pounds in prize money and that Sindh was annexed to British rule, with Napier in charge. Napier's actions led to a great deal of disquiet. Gladstone and the Whigs were critical, as even the West India Company were, but none took any steps to reverse the annexation. Napier's brother described him as one who subdued distant nations by his valour and governed them so wisely that English rule was reverenced and loved where before it had been feared and execrated. Nowadays, of course, we are rather less keen on subduing distant nations and imposing our rule upon them, and there were many at the time who did not revere and love English rule. But it would be wrong to dismiss Napier's programme of government as wholly bad. As far as he was concerned, the rulers of Sindh had treated their subjects unjustly. So while he accepted that a British presence in India was also unjust, he argued that at least its rule was just and brought benefits of British civilization. Thus he freed slaves and almost always favoured the poor and oppressed of Sindh when they brought complaints against their wealthier masters. He also refused to tolerate the killing of women suspected of adultery, and he banned the practice of sati. Sati was an ancient Hindu custom in which widows would sacrifice themselves by being burned alive on their husbands' funeral pyres. Napier took a typically direct approach, supposedly saying to local priests, "This burning of widows is your custom. Prepare the funeral pile. But my nation also has a custom. When men burn women alive, we hang them and confiscate all their property. My carpenters shall therefore erect gibbets on which to hang all concerned when the widow is consumed. Let us all act according to national customs." In another video, I asked if we should judge people by the best or the worst of their actions. I could easily ask the same of Napier. He defies simple categorisation as one of history's goodies or baddies. What interests me here, however, is the society which chose to honour him with this statue. Today we would probably not raise a statue in Trafalgar Square to a general like Napier, but in 1856 the British public did. When we think about it like this statue actually tells us as much about Victorian society, or at least the people who commissioned and paid for this statue, as it does Napier himself. In that way, his statue stands as a representation of what was important to an earlier culture and civilization. If, like modern-day iconoclasts, we remove physical evidence of these earlier societies because their values do not correspond with the values that we hold now, do we lose a means by which we might understand their culture? Does it make it harder for us to understand the past? Or are we instead confronting our past and asking it some difficult questions? What will future generations think of our actions? Will they lament the loss of historical artefacts? Or will they see this as part of the never-ending process of historical reinterpretation?